How can people be expected to have faith in Trump if he won't release the Epstein files? That post by Elon Musk this afternoon gets at a serious question, prompted by MAGA fans, among others, after the Justice Department asserted in a memo that convicted sex offender and multimillionaire Jeffrey Epstein did not blackmail high-profile clients, was not murdered before he was found dead in his jail cell in 2019, and in fact had no client list. Despite the fact that the very same administration officials, this department memo, first obtained by Axios, also comes 1 month after the billionaire Tesla founder took to his platform X as his alliance with President Trump dissolved. Quote, time to drop the really big bomb. Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason why they have not been made public, unquote. Musk deleted that post 2 days later, but the new memo...
Okay, so what just happened in a federal courtroom is absolutely explosive, and I need everyone to understand just how catastrophic this moment is for Donald Trump and his entire legal defense strategy. Prosecutors just played an audio recording in open court, and on this tape, you can allegedly hear Trump's own voice giving direct, explicit instructions to hide classified documents and obstruct federal investigations. We're not talking about coded language that lawyers can spin later. We're not talking about communications through intermediaries that create plausible deniability. We are talking about Donald Trump's actual voice recorded, giving what prosecutors are calling unmistakable orders to conceal evidence from federal investigators. And the reaction in that courtroom was absolutely stunning. According to multiple witnesses who were present, you could hear a pin drop when the recording started playing. Then came audible gasps from the jury box as they heard what was on the tape. Then came shocked murmurs rippling through the entire gallery as people processed what they were witnessing. And then, according to numerous reports from inside the courtroom, Trump himself completely lost control. We're talking about the former and current president of the United States screaming at the judge in the middle of his own trial, calling her radical and biased, claiming the entire judicial system is rigged against him, having what observers are describing as a full-blown public meltdown while the whole world watched. This is not normal courtroom behavior. This is a man who suddenly realized that all his money, all his political power, all his legal maneuvering might not be enough to save him this time. Now, before we break down exactly what's on this tape and why Trump's legal team fought so desperately to keep it from being played, I need to talk about something critical. You absolutely cannot trust mainstream media to give you the complete picture on stories like this. They'll show you a 30-second clip, give you a headline, maybe play a soundbite, but they won't explain what this really means legally, what the crime-fraud exception is, why this tape demolishes Trump's entire defense strategy, or what happens next in terms of potential conviction and sentencing. That's why we built Politics in Action to bring you real stories, real context, and absolutely no corporate spin. We're not controlled by advertisers or political operatives trying to shape the narrative to protect powerful people. We're here to break down what's actually happening in courtrooms across America and why it matters to you and to the future of accountability in this country. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines and understand the real legal and political implications of these massive developments, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring the news straight to you every single day, cutting through the partisan spin and the incomplete coverage. Just hit the subscribe button below to join this community. And if you believe in independent journalism that holds powerful people accountable and tells you what's really happening without protecting anyone, this is your moment. Subscribe, drop a comment with your thoughts on this tape and Trump's courtroom meltdown, and let's build something that actually matters. All right, let's get back to the video.
What do you think hearing that from Tucker?
Well, first of all, Tucker is being dangerous by alluding to something like a revolution when we're talking about the MAGA people, because we know that MAGA forces have been willing to use violence in pursuit of their political aims. We saw it on January 6th. You know, Gretchen said something a second ago about is Trump covering for Pam Bondi, but the question also may be, is Pam Bondi covering for Trump? We just really don't know. Donald Trump has been very forceful. He's a great television performer. When the question of Epstein comes up, every time he dissembles, he attacks the reporter. Remember before, he'll release the UFO files, he'll release the JFK files. Will you release the Epstein files? Well, I don't know if we should, do that. Innocent people may get wrapped up in that. I just think something's going on here. We got to keep asking the questions until we find out what's really happening, and they should just release the files.
Here's what happened. In a dramatic courtroom moment that legal observers are calling one of the most significant developments in modern American legal history, federal prosecutors played an audio recording that allegedly captures Donald Trump's voice directly ordering the concealment of classified documents from federal investigators. According to reports from people who were in the courtroom, this wasn't some ambiguous conversation that could be interpreted multiple ways, depending on your political perspective. This was explicit. This was clear. This was Trump allegedly giving specific instructions about hiding documents, preventing investigators from finding certain materials, and ensuring that particular items didn't show up in official records or responses to federal subpoenas. The kind of statements that prosecutors dream about, because they prove criminal intent beyond any reasonable doubt and eliminate virtually every possible defense strategy. Trump's legal team had fought incredibly hard to keep this tape from ever being played in court. They filed motion after motion arguing attorney-client privilege, claiming the recording was obtained improperly, asserting that it captured confidential legal discussions that should be protected from disclosure. They threw every conceivable legal objection at the wall, hoping something would stick and prevent the jury from ever hearing what was on that recording. But the judge wasn't having any of it. She issued a ruling that the crime-fraud exception applied to this recording, which is an absolutely devastating legal determination that basically means attorney-client privilege does not protect communications that were made to further a crime or cover one up. Let me break that down because understanding this legal doctrine is absolutely crucial to grasping why this ruling was so catastrophic for Trump's defense. Under normal circumstances, communications between lawyers and their clients are sacred and protected. You cannot use them as evidence in criminal proceedings. That protection exists for extremely good reasons. People need to be able to speak candidly and honestly with their attorneys without fear that their words will later be weaponized against them in court. The attorney-client privilege is one of the foundational elements of our legal system because it ensures that people can get effective legal representation and honest legal advice. But there is a massive, critically important exception to that rule. If you are using your lawyer to help you commit a crime or to cover up criminal conduct, the privilege disappears completely. The protection goes away. The communications become admissible evidence. And that is exactly what the judge found here. She determined after reviewing the recording and the surrounding evidence that the communications on this tape were not legitimate legal consultations about Trump's rights and options. They were part of an alleged criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice and hide evidence from federal investigators. Once she made that determination, everything on that recording became fair game for the prosecution. Every word Trump allegedly said is now part of the official court record and can be presented to the jury as evidence of his criminal intent and his criminal conduct. The prosecution is calling this the evidence suppression tape, and based on how things played out in that courtroom and based on the reactions from legal experts who have analyzed what happened, you can absolutely see why they are so confident about securing a conviction. Multiple legal analysts who reviewed the courtroom proceedings are using remarkably strong language. They're saying this tape essentially guarantees conviction on the obstruction charges. They're pointing out that you simply cannot explain away your own voice, giving direct orders to hide documents from federal investigators. There is no spin that works. There is no alternative interpretation that makes sense when jurors can hear the defendant's actual words with their own ears. This is what prosecutors call a smoking gun, the kind of direct evidence that eliminates reasonable doubt and makes conviction almost inevitable. And Trump's behavior in the courtroom only made an already terrible situation dramatically worse for him. When that tape started playing, according to witnesses, Trump initially went pale. He looked shocked and terrified, like he couldn't believe this was actually happening. And then, as the recording continued, and the jury listened to what was allegedly his voice giving these instructions, he apparently lost all control. He started screaming at the judge. He called her radical and biased. He claimed she was part of a conspiracy against him. He accused prosecutors of running a political persecution. He attacked the entire judicial system as rigged and corrupt. This wasn't strategic outrage designed to play to his political base. This was genuine panic. A man who suddenly realized that all his legal maneuvering and all his delay tactics and all his privilege claims had failed, and he was now facing overwhelming evidence of criminal conduct that a jury could evaluate for themselves. What Trump did in that courtroom was absolutely the worst possible thing a defendant can do during a criminal trial. When you attack the judge in front of the jury, when you scream and call her names and claim the system is rigged, you are not helping your case. You are making yourself look unstable. You are making yourself look guilty. You are making yourself look like someone who has no actual defense to the charges, so you are resorting to personal attacks and conspiracy theories instead of addressing the evidence. Any competent defense attorney would have been absolutely horrified watching their client behave this way. But Trump's meltdown also reveals something extremely important about his mental state in that moment. This is a man who has faced countless legal challenges over many decades. He has been sued hundreds of times. He has been investigated repeatedly by various authorities. He has built his entire public persona around being unflappable under pressure, around never backing down, around always projecting strength and control. For him to lose his composure so completely in that courtroom suggests he understood exactly how damaging this tape really was and how much danger he was suddenly in. The timing of all this could not be more significant from a political and constitutional perspective. Trump is the sitting president of the United States right now. He is supposed to be running the country, making policy decisions, conducting foreign relations, managing the executive branch. Instead, he is in a federal courtroom having emotional breakdowns while recordings of his own voice allegedly ordering criminal conduct play over the speakers for a jury to hear. The contrast between the dignity and composure we expect from the office of the presidency and the chaos and panic we are actually seeing is absolutely jarring, and it raises profound questions about whether someone facing these kinds of serious criminal charges and exhibiting this kind of instability can effectively lead the nation. Okay. Let's break down what this actually means across multiple dimensions because the implications of this tape and this courtroom moment reach far beyond just the immediate criminal case. First, understand that this tape appears to provide direct evidence of criminal intent, which is typically the single hardest element for prosecutors to prove in obstruction cases. In any federal obstruction prosecution, you don't just have to show that someone's actions interfered with an investigation or impeded law enforcement. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they did it deliberately, with full knowledge that what they were doing was wrong, and with the specific intention of obstructing justice. That is an incredibly high evidentiary bar, because it requires proving what was going on inside someone's mind at the time they took the actions in question. Defense attorneys exploit that difficulty constantly. They argue that their client was confused about the law. They claim their client misunderstood what investigators were asking for. They suggest their client thought they were following proper procedures or protecting legitimate interests. These arguments create reasonable doubt about intent, and reasonable doubt leads to acquittals. But when you have an audio recording of the defendant explicitly stating their intentions, when you have their own voice saying, "Hide this, don't let investigators find that, make sure these documents don't show up in the records we provide," all of those defense strategies collapse completely. There is no ambiguity about intent. There is no room for alternative explanations. The defendant's own words tell the jury exactly what they meant to do and why they did it. Legal experts analyzing this case are being remarkably blunt in their assessments. Multiple analysts have said that with this kind of direct evidence, conviction becomes almost certain. You cannot ask a jury to disbelieve what they heard with their own ears. You cannot spin away the defendant's actual voice. This is why the tape is so absolutely devastating to Trump's defense, and this is why his legal team fought so desperately to keep it from being played. Second, the judge's ruling that the crime-fraud exception applies has implications that extend far beyond just this one recording. Once a judge determines that attorney-client privilege has been pierced because the communications were part of a criminal scheme, that determination potentially opens the door to a much wider universe of previously protected material. Other recordings, written communications, emails, text messages, notes from meetings, anything that was part of the same alleged obstruction conspiracy may now be admissible as evidence. The prosecution isn't just working with this one tape. They may suddenly have access to an entire trove of communications that Trump's legal team had assumed would remain protected forever. This could mean more damaging evidence is coming, more recordings, more documents, more direct proof of criminal conduct. Trump's lawyers had built their entire defensive strategy around privilege claims, and the judge just demolished that entire approach with one ruling. Third, think about what Trump's courtroom meltdown means for his legal exposure going forward. Screaming at a judge and calling her biased in open court is textbook contempt of court. It is disrespectful to the judicial process. It potentially intimidates witnesses and inappropriately influences jurors. Judges take courtroom decorum extremely seriously, and they have broad authority to punish defendants who engage in this kind of behavior. Some legal observers are speculating that Trump could face additional criminal contempt charges or severe sanctions specifically for how he behaved when the tape played. At minimum, his outburst gives prosecutors another powerful narrative to present to the jury. This is a defendant who has absolutely no respect for the law, no respect for the courts, no ability to control himself when confronted with evidence of his own wrongdoing, and no credibility when he claims he was just following normal procedures or acting in good faith. Fourth, consider how this tape fits into the broader pattern of Trump's legal troubles across multiple cases. The classified documents saga that led to the Mar-a-Lago raid, the January 6th investigations into obstruction of congressional proceedings, the various inquiries into attempts to interfere with election certifications, all of these cases share a common thread: allegations that Trump and his associates actively worked to hide evidence, obstruct investigations, and evade accountability through any means necessary. This tape provides concrete evidence of exactly that pattern. It shows alleged obstruction in action. It demonstrates what prosecutors believe is Trump's consistent approach to legal problems, which is concealment rather than cooperation. When jurors can see that pattern across multiple cases, it makes the current evidence even more compelling. It suggests this wasn't an isolated mistake or a misunderstanding. It was allegedly a deliberate strategy that Trump employed whenever investigators got too close to the truth. Fifth, let's talk about the unprecedented constitutional questions this situation raises. We now have a sitting president facing what appears to be overwhelming evidence of serious federal obstruction charges. If this tape leads to conviction, which multiple legal experts are now saying is highly likely, we will be in completely uncharted constitutional territory. What happens when a sitting president is found guilty of federal crimes? Can you imprison a sitting president, or does the office itself provide some form of immunity from incarceration? What does a conviction mean for the president's ability to exercise executive authority? Who runs the country if the president is incarcerated or under criminal sanction? These aren't abstract hypothetical questions that law professors debate in seminars anymore. These are practical problems that may require real answers in the very near future, and our constitutional system provides no clear guidance because we have never faced this situation before in American history. Sixth, think about what this means politically heading into future elections, and for Trump's ability to govern effectively. Trump's political brand has always been built around strength, around being a fighter who never backs down, around projecting absolute confidence and control. But that courtroom moment, the terror on his face when the tape played, the screaming and the meltdown, that image is the opposite of strength. It's panic. It's desperation. It's a man who looks like he knows he's beaten. Trump's opponents, whether Democrats in a general election or Republicans in primaries, now have incredibly powerful ammunition. They can point to this tape and say, here is direct evidence of criminal conduct. They can point to his courtroom behavior and say, here is a man who cannot control himself under pressure. Every time Trump attacks the justice system or claims he's being persecuted, his opponents can respond by asking voters to listen to the tape themselves and decide whether this looks like persecution or accountability. Seventh, consider the international implications. Foreign leaders and adversaries are watching all of this extremely closely. When they see the American president having a public meltdown in a criminal trial, when they see recordings being played that allegedly prove obstruction of justice, that affects how they view American leadership and American reliability on the world stage. If Trump was willing to allegedly obstruct federal investigations and hide classified documents, why would foreign governments trust him with sensitive intelligence or confidential diplomatic communications? The tape reinforces existing concerns among America's allies that Trump prioritizes his personal interests over national interests and that he cannot be relied upon to follow rules or respect legal constraints. That makes diplomatic negotiations harder and reduces American credibility and influence internationally. Eighth, let's discuss what happens next procedurally in this trial. The defense is going to have to mount some kind of response to this tape, though it's extremely difficult to imagine what that response could possibly be. They cannot claim the tape doesn't exist. They cannot argue it was obtained illegally after the judge already ruled on that. They cannot say it's been taken out of context when the jury heard the whole recording. Their only real option is to try to minimize the damage, perhaps by arguing that Trump didn't fully understand what he was saying or that his words don't constitute the specific crime charged. But those arguments are going to be very weak in the face of such direct evidence. The prosecution will continue presenting additional evidence that corroborates what's on the tape, showing a pattern of obstruction rather than an isolated statement. And Trump himself may have to testify, which creates enormous additional risk because prosecutors will confront him directly with his own recorded words and ask him to explain what he meant. Ninth, watch for how Trump responds outside the courtroom in his public statements and on social media. He will almost certainly continue attacking the judge, the prosecutors, the entire judicial system. He'll claim this is all political persecution and that the tape is somehow fake or misrepresented, He'll try to rally his base by portraying himself as a victim of a corrupt system. But every time he does that, he's reminding the public about the tape and about his courtroom meltdown. He's keeping the story alive and giving his opponents more opportunities to contrast his claims of innocence with the actual evidence that jurors heard. This is a no-win situation for Trump politically. If he stays quiet, the tape speaks for itself. If he attacks aggressively, he keeps the story in the news cycle and risks making things worse. 10th, and this is absolutely crucial, think about what this moment means for the rule of law and for accountability in America. For years, there have been questions about whether Trump could be held accountable for alleged criminal conduct, whether he was effectively above the law because of his wealth and his political power, and his ability to delay and obstruct legal proceedings indefinitely. This tape and the judge's ruling represent a critical test of whether our justice system can actually function when the defendant commands vast resources and devoted political followers. If this tape leads to conviction despite Trump's power and influence, it sends an important message that no one is above the law. If Trump somehow escapes accountability even with this kind of direct evidence, it raises profound questions about whether the legal system can hold powerful people responsible for their actions. So here's the bottom line. Prosecutors just played a tape in federal court that allegedly features Donald Trump's own voice ordering the concealment of classified documents and the obstruction of federal investigations. The judge ruled that attorney-client privilege does not protect this recording because of the crime-fraud exception, meaning the communications were part of an alleged criminal conspiracy. Trump had a complete public meltdown in the courtroom when the tape played, screaming at the judge and attacking the system in ways that made him look guilty and unstable. Legal experts are saying this tape essentially guarantees conviction because you cannot explain away direct evidence of your own voice ordering criminal conduct. This creates unprecedented constitutional questions about what happens when a sitting president is convicted of serious federal crimes. And it represents a critical moment in the broader question of whether anyone, even the most powerful person in the country, can truly be held accountable under the law. Trump's reaction in that courtroom, the terror and then the rage, suggests he knows exactly how much trouble he's in. The evidence exists. The recording is in the official record. The jury heard it with their own ears, and there is no taking it back. What happens next in this trial could reshape American politics and constitutional law for generations. The defense will try to respond somehow. More evidence may emerge. Trump will undoubtedly continue his attacks on the judicial system. But that moment when the tape played, the silence, the gasps, the meltdown, that is going to be remembered as a turning point in American legal history. Keep your eyes on this case because the implications are still unfolding in real time, and what happens over the next weeks and months could determine not just Trump's fate, but the future of presidential accountability in America. This story is far from over, and the next developments could be even more explosive than what we've already seen.